If your activation is low and the next thing you are planning to ship is a checklist or a product tour, stop. These tools can absolutely move activation. However, most of the time they don't quite hit the mark, and there's a specific reason for that. In this video, I will break down why so many onboarding changes won't work out, and I will show you how to make your next move a lot more likely to succeed. If you look up how to improve SaaS onboarding, you will likely come across these tips: checklists, product tours, contextual tooltips, and there are real reasons for that. These tools are pretty easy to set up. Once you've got them up and running, you can tweak the content, the triggers, and the step order without needing to get engineers involved every time. This means you can run experiments faster. Plus, they give you access to useful data, completion rates, drop-off by step, which of course means you can measure their effectiveness. But can you? The main aim of any onboarding change is to boost activation and retention. But here's the thing. Your user can tick all the boxes on a checklist or watch every product tour and still not activate. Now, of course, there are plenty of products that have seen activation and retention lifts after adding these tools. But that's because the tool weren't working in isolation. The onboarding experience underneath was already solid. Think of it like a damp patch problem. Imagine you move into a new place and there is a damp patch on the wall. You paint over it and it looks alright for a bit. But then the paint starts peeling and the damp patch comes back. That's because the paint wasn't the issue, the temp underneath was. Onboarding works the same way, which is why I think about it in 3 layers. At the top, the surface. This is where the tools we've been talking about are. They are like the paint, adding a layer of guidance on top of what you've already built. But the people making these tools and the guides recommending them assume everything underneath is working. So what's underneath? You've got the structure, the actual experience your user goes through. This is going to be every step, every task, and whether it's doing its job. And at the bottom, you've got the foundations. These are the big questions you need to answer before the layers on top can work. They define what each step in the structure needs to do. There are 4 key questions your team needs to answer together. Let's start with your user and their situation. You are probably familiar with different user segments and what that means. The problem is most of the time segments get defined by attributes like job titles or company size. That's what welcome surveys are for. They ask about your role, your team size, and route you to a different experience based on the answer. But that doesn't tell you what someone needs to see from your product to stick around. What you really need to know is what triggered their problem, what they've tried before, and what they've learned to avoid. This history shapes what someone needs to experience before they can trust your product. Getting the user's context right is what makes the difference between designing for a real person and designing just for an assumption. It's not simple though. There are usually multiple users with different contexts using the same product, and one onboarding journey won't work for all of them. So when you want to improve the onboarding experience, you first need to decide who your primary user is. Now, the only way to get all this context you need is by talking to these people, which I'm assuming you already do regularly. If you need some help with this, job to be done interviews can be really helpful. To illustrate the foundations, I will use an example product, an expense tracking app. The idea is the same no matter what you are building. A broad user context might be people who want to manage their money better. Now, this tells you what the user wants, but not why the problem became urgent and what they've tried or what would make them trust your product. A more precise user context would be someone who reached the end of the month, checked their bank account, and could not explain where $300 went. They also tried a notes app and quit after a week because it felt like too much admin. Now, this tells you the specific problem the person is facing and what solution failed them in the past. And that's what they are watching for in your product. This tells us that we need to put this user in control of their finances faster, and we cannot demand too much effort before delivering anything useful. Once you know their situation, the next question is, what does their world look like when their problem is solved? That's the transformation. There is a great quote from Cathy Sierra that sums it up. People don't use your app because they like the app or they like you. They use it because they like themselves and they tell their friends because they like their friends. So basically, your users don't sign up to use your product, they sign up to get better at something they care about. Your product is only the vehicle that gets them there. If you have users who are activating, your product is already creating that change for some people. The real question is, can your team name what that change is in your users' world? Because if you can't name the change, you can't design onboarding to deliver it. You can only hope the right users will find it on their own. When the transformation isn't defined precisely, onboarding gets built around the product, not the user. The user goes through the steps, but they never get close to the change they came for, so they leave and don't come back. Going back to the expense tracker example, for someone who reached the end of the month and couldn't explain where their money went, and they quit another product because it felt like too much admin, a broad transformation definition could be: the user feels more in control of their finances and has a better overview of their spending. But this could describe almost any finance product. A more precise version would be: the user now is a person who knows exactly where every dollar goes before the month ends. They open their banking app mid-month and nothing surprises them. They make spending decisions with confidence. This describes one specific change for one specific user. And at this point, this is not specific to your product. But once you know what the user wants to achieve in their life, you can think about the moment that can make that change real within your product. And that moment is what I call first proof. And this is our third foundation. Before this moment, your user is still deciding. They might understand what your product meant to do. They might want the outcome it promises, but they haven't yet seen anything inside it that makes them believe it will actually get them there. Once they got to that moment, your product stops being something they are just trying and starts being something they trust. First proof is not a step or a feature in your product, it's an experience. The moment something shifts for your user. To define that moment, you need to answer two questions. Knowing your user context, what would count as proof for them? And what is the strongest moment in your product as it currently stands that could provide that proof? Both of these come from conversations with your users and watching them interact with your product. User testing helps you spot the moment a user gets it because you are watching them in real time. You see the moment with your own eyes instead of guessing. When your user stops describing what they are doing and start explaining what your product means to them, that shift is the signal. They've moved from following steps to understanding the point. In the example I've been using, a too broad definition of first proof might be: the app gives the user a view of their spending across budget categories so they can see where their money is going. But the problem is that this still puts the work on the user. They have to remember to open the app and notice when they are overspending, and then act before it's too late. But remember, this user already abandoned the product because it required too much work. So, if we want to be precise, first proof would be: the app detects when a budget category is close to its limit and sends an alert. The user opens it mid-month and sees exactly where they stand, while there is still time to do something about it. Here the product has taken the work on. It reaches out at the right moment with exactly what this user needs. They got an alert mid-month, they could see exactly which category was close to the limit, and they still had time to adjust. Now you have a moment to design toward. A moment where your product earns the user's trust. But as I mentioned, first proof is an experience, not something you can measure within your product. So the final foundation must show you the exact action in your product that signals the user has reached their first proof moment and is likely activated. I call this the proof action. You need this because without a signal, you can't tell whether the changes you make to onboarding are actually doing anything. And if you measure the wrong thing, you will optimize for the wrong thing. You might see the onboarding completion rate is up, yet it doesn't move retention numbers. At first, it will be a hypothesis, your best current judgment based on what you know about your user, both from the other three foundations and their behavior in your product, so your user data. Do the users who reach that action retain and convert at a higher rate than those who don't? If yes, you found the right signal. In our example, a broad definition of proof action might be: the user opens their dashboard and sees their monthly spending, but that tells you they came back to the app and reviewed their spending. It doesn't tell you whether the product did something for them or whether they just happened to open it. A more precise definition would be: the user opens the app from the push notification that warns a tracked budget category is close to its monthly spending limit. Here you can see what triggered the return. The product sent them back at exactly the moment we defined as first proof. That's what makes it a stronger hypothesis. The trigger is directly connected to the experience we are trying to create for this user. You now have a signal you can actually measure, something that tells you whether your onboarding changes are doing the work or just moving completion rates that don't matter. There is one more thing to consider when identifying the proof action. For some products, one instance of this action isn't enough. A user opening the app from one notification doesn't tell you much on its own. It only becomes meaningful when it happens repeatedly, when the product keeps bringing them back at the right moment and they keep responding. Some well-known examples come from Facebook and Slack. Facebook found that a new user adding 7 friends in 10 days was a far stronger signal than just one friend connection. And Slack found that teams that had sent 2,000 messages were far more likely to keep using the product than those who hadn't. You can see this from your retention data. What did those users who retained do and how frequently versus those who didn't? These 4 foundations are key before you do any changes in your onboarding. They define what the journey needs to achieve for one specific type of user. If you have multiple user types, each one needs their own foundations. Figuring them out isn't something you can do on your own. It's a team effort between the people shaping and building the product and those who talk to users. They need to work through each foundation together and be honest about what it means for them. Once your team can write one precise sentence for each of the 4, you have something most onboarding work skips. Once you've got that sorted, you are ready to dive into the onboarding journey itself. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.